Good afternoon, everyone. We are so pleased that you've joined us for our discussion on the topic we've titled Reconcilable Differences, a Conversation about Religion and Science. This event is hosted by the School of Medicine Basic Sciences as part of a monthly series called Lab to Table Conversations, connecting biomedical research to real-life topics. My name is Alyssa Hasty, and I am a professor in the Department of Molecular Physiology and Biophysics here at Vanderbilt. My primary identity is as a follower of Christ, and my joy in scientific discovery is enhanced because of my faith. Thus, this topic is dear to me, and I'm delighted to moderate this discussion. Today, we're excited to have with us religious and scientific leaders for a discussion from diverse perspectives about the dialogue between religion and science, how faith and science can impact each other positively, and how to stem implicit biases on both sides of the dialogue, among other ideas within this general topic. So for a little bit of housekeeping, please place any questions you have in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We also receive numerous questions from registrants, and we will answer as many of the audience questions as we can at the end of this moderated discussion. So first of all, I'm pleased to turn the conversation over to each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Lim, would you go first for us, please?
Yes, I'll be delighted to. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Lim, or good evening as well, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Paul Lim. I've been at Vanderbilt for the last 16 years. I serve as a professor, associate professor of the history of Christianity in the Divinity School, as well as an affiliate faculty member in religious studies, history, and Asian studies. And so I'm really eager to learn from our panelists and engage in a conversation that I hope will be generous and generative. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rabbi Mackler?
Hello, thank you. I am Shana Goldstein-Mackler. I am one of the rabbis at the Temple, Congregation Ohavai Shalom, which is Nashville's historic Reform congregation. I've served at the Temple for the past 18 years, and I am as well grateful for this opportunity, for this meaningful conversation coming together from our various faith traditions and backgrounds and perspectives to come together for the greater good of our community, and we hope positively for humanity. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Imam Bahlul?
Yes, this is Osama Bahlul. I am the Imam of the Islamic Center of Nashville. I've been in Middle Tennessee for about 14 years, moved to Tennessee from Texas and from Egypt to Texas. I am quite excited about this discussion. I always feel that the religious perspective has to be open about the serious discussion with the scientific community, with the hope of bringing really a unique perspective to everyone, especially the young folks within our community. They are excited, and I'm looking forward to learning from everyone as well.
Wonderful. And we understand you're joining us from Egypt. So we especially appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And last but not least, Dr. Maureen Gannon.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen Gannon. I'm a professor in the Department of Medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in the School of Medicine. I'm originally from New York City. I've been here at Vanderbilt now for 26 years. I would be what you would call a cradle Catholic. So was born and raised Catholic. My dad was a deacon in the Catholic Church. My mom taught Catholic school for about 30 years, and I attended Catholic school all the way from first grade through college, and still attend church every week. And my son was brought up in the Catholic Church as well. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be part of this discussion, and I think this is a really great opportunity for all of us to get together and talk about this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, let's jump right in with our first question, which is, what does engagement between religion and science look like in your religious community? And do you feel there are any misperceptions about how your religious community interacts with science? So Dr. Lim, why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure. Well, I do think that religious communities that I'm part of, which is Christian, which is also, to be more particular, Protestant, Christianity, Protestantism and science has had a very interesting and sometimes fraught relationship. And I think it's important, at least from my vantage point, to be very open and honest about it, rather than just saying, oh, there are no problems. They're utterly reconcilable. I think historically speaking, whether it is First of all, I do think that religion and science are seeking to answer similar yet different questions, right? I think theology and religion is concerned about the question of why. Why is there anything at all? Whereas science is much more concerned about not metaphysical, not philosophical questions as much as just seeking to answer the hows. So I do think that that's a very important distinction to really think about. We do have, so I attend a church in Nashville called Christ Presbyterian Church, and we do have quite a number of scientists affiliated with Vanderbilt, Belmont, and numerous hospitals and healthcare professionals, but also as somebody who's recently left us to go work with Francis Collins at the NIH and so on. I think for many of my friends and myself, religion and science are reconcilable while there are some questions that are still being pursued. And I think it is important to recognize that. I think there are misperceptions and also correct perceptions. I mean, I think, let me just start with the elephant in the room in some ways. I think about the vaccine, COVID vaccine, and I think in some ways, some conservative Christians have been kind of anti-vaxxers under the aegis of religious commitments. And I think that has therefore created this further divergence or dichotomy between religion and science as if they're really irreconcilable. And I think while there are some people who would hold to the more extreme positions, I think the vast majority of people would like to see more of a kind of a conciliatory approaches historically and also contemporary wise. And I'll have more to say about that, but I do think that, recognizing, people such as Galileo Galilei on the one hand, as well as Charles Darwin, and also the Scopes trial, and all the way to today with the COVID-19 vaccine. I think Protestantism, Christianity, and science have had a lot of very interesting interrelated conversations and confrontations and conflicts as well, and also some really, really amicable solutions in the mix of the two.
Yeah. So again, this idea of the engagement between religion and science in your own religious community, Imam Bahlul, what would you say about that?
Well, I think with what's just being said, I feel like we have to say we are speaking about the purely religious perspective. Does the Quran, in the case of Islam, encourage science or not? Is it does the New Testament or the Old Testament encourage the scientific perspective or not? You can find within any religious community some people from far left to far right. In the case of the Islamic tradition, I would say Islam as a religion encourages science. And not only that, if you take even the Quran literally, thinking and questioning anything around you, not only appreciate it, but it's one of the direct proof of the existence of God, according to the Quranic perspective. So in Islam, we recognize the scientific community as people worshiping God, and they can, if they have a good intention, they can be rewarded by their work. So I might say comfortably throughout the history of Muslims, Islam as a religion encourage its people to think about their surrounding. God said in the Quran, there is science, and those science can be your tool, or the bridge will take you eventually to God. So I might say comfortably that Islam appreciate and encourage the scientific perspective.
And Rabbi Mackler, what about your Jewish community?
I would agree very similarly to Imam Osama that our Jewish community also has a very positive relationship with science. Of course, there are the more extreme, contenders that will challenge that from time to time throughout our history. But really, I think the idea of both in science and Judaism, that deep-rooted tradition of challenging assumptions, of challenging the status quo, of asking, how do we know something? That's very much embedded in rabbinic tradition and Jewish tradition. And I think coming from that perspective, we understand that knowing more is a way and a pathway to God, that human intellect and critical thinking are gifts. And the way that we can know God is through, the experiences of faith or through the material world. And I think we have the opportunity to deepen our understanding of both by employing both. And so throughout Jewish tradition and Jewish history, overwhelmingly, science has been able to inform religion, and we think the other way around as well. But they both seem to be different pathways to knowing God. And having them together, you have a fuller, more dimensional picture.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have is, why do you think some scientists question the existence of God or view faith and science as being incompatible or in conflict? And Maureen, I would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, if I could just also answer the previous question.
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. And then I'll get to the second question. So as I said, I attended Catholic schools from first grade all the way through college. And so I just want to amplify, what Rabbi Mackler said. I mean, I was always taught in school that God gave us a mind and he expects us to use it. And that we're supposed to probe and question the world around us and really debate with each other and to try to get to higher truths, not only about how the natural world works, but also about our purpose in life and why we're here. And that really does come through faith more than through science. And the Catholic Church has, been very involved in education over the years. There's lots of wonderful parochial schools, colleges, and universities around the world. And I was always taught high quality, rigorous scientific method throughout my education. So I do think that the Catholic Church has a history of, integrating with science and teaching science and questioning things. But as a scientist myself, I have definitely interacted with scientists who believe in a higher power, but maybe don't prescribe to a particular organized religion. I've definitely also met people who don't believe that there is a God. And also people of different faiths who are very strong in their faith. So I do think that there's quite a variety of people in science, as in other professions. In science, we're taught to come up with a hypothesis and to figure out multiple assays and ways to test that hypothesis. So we gather data, we look for supporting evidence for or against our hypothesis, we measure things, we quantify them, and then we critically evaluate the results. And we're very self-critical. We look for holes, we look for mistakes before we come to any conclusion. And so this is really almost impossible really to do with God. You can't measure, you can't quantify, you can't prove the existence. And that's really the very definition of faith, believing in something you can't see or prove. So I could imagine for some who've dedicated their lives to scientific inquiry, this might be difficult to resolve. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation to talk about why really that, those aren't irreconcilable.
I think a great follow-up to that I would love to hear from Dr. Lim, Imam Bahul, and Rabbi Mackler is, are there specific aspects of your faith that you think scientists find unbelievable?
Sure. I mean, I think, I don't want to speak for, Judaism and Islam, but I think all Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, ascribe to a theology of creation, that there is a transcendent creator, right? And then there is also the immanent kind of manifestations of that creator's love and will and purposes. So I think when you think about that there is something beyond this world, I mean, by the logics and laws of scientific inquiry, if you cannot touch, feel, and with our sensory experience, if you cannot actually get to that, then you can posit and postulate, but it's really impossible to prove the existence of God. I mean, I think there have been so many who have attempted it, whether it is Al-Ghazali or Thomas Aquinas or Maimonides and others. And I do think that we have to recognize that there are different rules of engagement, because I think the moment that religious folks start to say, well, we're actually talking about the same thing and there are no differences, I think in some ways we're being dishonest or fooling ourselves. I think there are differences. There are certain irreconcilable differences, namely to get to the proof that God does exist. I think nowadays, I mean, I could be wrong, but in the scholarly world, most people do not believe that such endeavors are actually beneficial or possible. But when I think about history of Christianity in particular, there have been attempts, right? There have been laudable attempts, like Isaac Newton, the guy, the gravity person, he wrote more works of theology and biblical commentaries than he did about mathematics and physics. I do think that there are, we can line up people, whether in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, who have, with their religious commitments, have written various scientific inquiries and texts that have influenced not only contemporaries, but also subsequent generations. But I do think that that's a different thing from saying that they are actually completely compatible, because I do think that, science is asking the questions of how, and for many of my scientific colleagues, who aren't religious at all, for them, they say, Paul, you Christians or you religious people are always trying to make science as part of a domain of religious discourses or theology. And I think that's something that I've come up against again and again.
Actually, I might say I'm not comfortable with us saying that we can't prove the existence of God. If we can't prove his existing, there is no point of us believing in him. Coming from the Islamic tradition, the Quran used many signs, from mentioning fingerprint to pregnancy stages. This is 1500 years to prove the existence of God. I want to say it's doable. Ibn Taymiyyah, I'm speaking about 700 years after Muhammad, wrote a fantastic book titled "There is no contradiction between a sound intellectual position and an authentic sentence within Islam as a religion." And he wrote really a beautiful book. They said it was the core part of his publication. And he said he is comfortable really being able to prove the existence of God. We have to differentiate, however, between us saying there is a God and can we see him now or not. I have issue with my vision, and with my glasses, I can see many things. If I take my glasses off, Paul, most likely I will not be able to see you. It doesn't mean that you are not existing, but it means that I have certain limitation. I want to ask, maybe if you allow me to differentiate between us trying to be in the same level of God, understanding everything about him, and us having the ability to prove his existing. A direct answer to your questions about can I find any conflict really between Islam as a religion and the scientific community? I think in general, Islam encourages research, but we want to be mindful of our limitation. We want to ask how within our ability. The scientific community, many of you wants to have really white and black, and sometimes gray exists, I assume. I don't know what Rabbi Mackler would say about that.
I think, we're going to agree on a lot, I think, Imam, together on this. I think, trying to prove something for traditions that have an invisible, somewhat unknowable, ineffable God, it allows us for that the hopeful chance of getting to know and having God be revealed, whether it's through science or through text and study and religious philosophy. I think if we're thinking of other things that scientists, beyond that question of whether God exists, just in our traditions, I think, the concepts of miracles are challenging for some scientists who may be not from a religious background. But even Jewish scholars and theologians and philosophers have questioned those miracles throughout our centuries. Some phenomena like the splitting of the Sea of Reeds or the plagues that had visited during the Exodus, people had tried to find rational explanations for them. But even from, the 6th to 12th centuries, we've seen attempts to embed the miraculous within the natural order. I think trying to explain that even in the text itself, the miracles were part of that creation, so that they weren't really out of the natural order. Because I think in our tradition, seeing even the order of creation, seeing the order from chaos, that in and of itself is proof of some sort of design. And I think for people that have difficulties with the miracles being the basis of those traditions, if you could just look at the text and you see how the people even experiencing those miracles in the text are not very moved by the miracles themselves, or at least not for a very long time. They tend to move on very quickly. It's not the basis of what the religion is, at least from our tradition, doesn't start from a miracle. It starts from really trying to make order out of chaos and have that investigation be part of the understanding and the knowledge gathering that religion itself is.
I appreciate all three of those perspectives. Thank you. Dr. Gannon, I think this is a good question for you to start us off with. Religion is often perceived to be based on tradition and immutable, while science is often perceived as the generation of new information and knowledge that become a fixed fact. But is that accurate?
So yeah, that's a great question. As we've been saying over and over as a group here, science really helps us understand how things work in the natural world around us. Science is a pursuit that great thinkers have been undertaking for, thousands of years. And has been brought up in the past, our great thinkers were multifactorial. So they were polymaths, they were theologians, they were artists, they were philosophers and scientists. And all of that was rolled into one person. And I think, unfortunately, we've started to parcel that out into, being more specialized. And I would love to see that come together again and have people be more well-rounded and think about all of those pursuits. In science, the answers that we get to, the questions that we pose are really only as good as the methods that we have at that point in history. So, over time, the methods that we have to gather the data and our ability to interpret those results, changes. We're now able to visualize things at higher resolution. We can gather larger data sets than we could before. So scientists are constantly going back and readdressing questions that you might say, well, you already answered that question. But now we have better tools, kind of like what Imam Osama was saying, if you have better glasses, things that weren't visible before, now we can see. So we have more powerful microscopes and we have genetic tools and DNA sequences. So what was today's dogma might actually change tomorrow. And in science, we talk a lot about, in our grants, we have to write about innovation. And, people are always talking about, oh, this new discovery was paradigm shifting. Well, if it's paradigm shifting, that means it disproved or altered our thinking about something that we previously held as fact. So really, our facts in science are only as good as the current tools that we have to measure things at any given point in time. And similarly, as Rabbi Meckler was saying, I think that although maybe it happens a little more slowly in religion than in science, there's constant reevaluation, reinterpretation, and debate about religious texts, about the scripture, what is the meaning behind it. For example, the Catholic Church went through huge changes in the 1960s with Vatican II. And then again, not too long ago, a few years ago, there was some reinterpretation and reevaluation and retranslation of some scripture. And some of the prayers that we said for years in the Mass have been changed based on these new interpretations. So I think fundamental truths of a particular faith probably don't undergo change, but I think religions do evolve over time, as does science, although the pace may be different.
Thank you. Thank you for that thorough answer. Dr. Lim, this question we'll have you start with. How do those engaged in religious science, scholars, theologians, and historians, how do they impact how religious texts are interpreted or understood over time? And that sort of follows up on what Maureen was just getting at as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you for all the perspectives offered by the Rabbi and Imam and Dr. Gannon. I do think that it's important for us to recognize that, just as has been talked about, modernity has influenced the way we think about science, the way we think about our religious identities and institutions. I think it's really important for us to recognize that. I think, for example, one of the thinkers that I recently wrote about in this book that I'm writing on Jesus is Baruch Spinoza. Is a Jewish philosopher, theologian, whose identity within the Jewish community was always contested because of his kind of thinking. And also Thomas Hobbes was a Christian and whose identity as a Christian was always contested. He was kind of, excommunicated by some people but not really by others. And Thomas Woolston. So I'm writing about these peoples as they really struggle with the notion of miracles. And I know Rabbi Meckler just mentioned it earlier about how different periods of interpretations have really kind of, whether from 6th through 12th century, try to kind of envelop this sort of a miraculous accounts into the natural kind of phenomena. But then when modernity strikes, whenever that was, like 1500 onward to about 1700, a lot of rules of engagement began to shift. I think whether then going from geocentrism to heliocentrism, that I think coming to recognize that maybe we're not the center of our discourses anymore, that created this, unleashed a lot of nervousness around just kind of justifying that we are really true religion. We have the best perspective on the world. And not only Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, but other religions. And I think one of the great aspects of modernity is discovery of the other, discovery of the racial other, discovery of the religious other, that really began to kind of raise some important questions about who are we in light of the new discoveries that we have just made. And I do think that for many of the religious scholars, their questions and assumptions began to really change with the discovery of the other, whether in the new worlds, the so-called new worlds, or discovery of, gravity, and a lot of, for example, there was a Boyle Society, Robert Boyle, who's the discoverer of what is it that they discovered? He's a chemist, right? And so the Boyle lectures were established in the 1680s in London. They were designed to talk about the reconcilable, the possibility of reconciliation between religion and science. So as a historian of 17th and 18th century England, what I would say is there must have been something that threatened the establishment for them to establish a lecture to say, okay, we want to actually talk about the fact that religion and science are utterly reconcilable. And to me, so taking off my religious hat and trying to be a sort of a neutral observer as a historian, looking at this human phenomena of this establishment of a lecture, and all of these religious people and scientific people are saying, okay, they're actually really reconcilable, is a very interesting milestone in the history of, in Western intellectual history that kind of takes seriously Christian participation in it, as a way to say, okay, maybe there are all of these touch points in human history that opened up different possibilities, new possibilities of learning that meant, at least initially, it was unsettling and destabilizing, but then it'll have a kind of stabilizing impact later on. For example, whether it is Galileo and the attitude of the Catholic Church toward Galileo on the one hand, or Charles Darwin and the reception and attitude of the Anglican Church, toward him. In England, or whether we talk about the Scopes trial in America, whether American Protestants' attitudes toward this whole thing about, putting this whole Darwinian evolutionary paradigm as the way to look at the world. So I do think that within Christianity, there's been this kind of very robust and at times fraught engagement with this theories and discoveries of science on the one hand, and theories and discoveries of the sacred text, Christian scriptures on the other, and their exegesis and their theology. And I think that presents not a neat and nice and monolithic kind of story. It is more complicated. It's much more diverse. It is more, to me, therefore, a lot more dynamic. That opens up the possibility of future inquiries from religion, Christianity, and science.
Imam Balul, are there any ways that science has impacted the Islamic interpretation of your texts over time?
Well, listening to the very kind and deep perspective here kind of reminded me with one of the principles about Islam as a religion. Islam as a religion intend to highlight general principles. Those general principles really allow room for personal interpretation throughout the history, and serve really well to prevent a chaos or a conflict with the religious text. When it comes to the area of the faith, the Quran is very exact and direct. When it comes to the majority of the religious perspective after that, the Islam really allows people to have their own perspective within their own context. And this is prevent any really conflict, or a serious conflict, I might add, between the religion and the other, not only the science perspective, but any others. It seems to me that Ibn Sina or Al-Ghazali or others throughout the Muslim history used their deep understanding of physics and others really to enrich their perspective within Islam as a religion, not really to bring any conflict. It seems like the Christian community has to work harder and they have to overcome certain texts. But in the case of Islam, Islam allows them to go full speed. You have the right to questions, not only the right to question, you've been encouraged to questions. But I might add, it seems like when speaking about Muslims, Jewish, Christians, and other, I hope we keep in mind that we are speaking about a diverse community within each religious practice. Muslims in America and the Western world get used to questions and the debate. It's not like a traditional, if this is the right term to use, Muslim growing up in the Middle or the Far East. I was born in the Middle East. I spent the last 20 years of my life in America, and I can see while in my traditional studies, they encouraged us to ask, but it was a very obvious rules. No one even, very silent rules that you don't ask about this and that. We're encouraged to ask, and the questions we receive in the West empower my belief, and I'm more comfortable with my religious life, and I don't see any conflict. But you might come across Muslims somewhere assuming conflict. I don't see any conflict within any text and any other perspective, keeping in mind the human limitation.
Rabbi Mackler?
I think, the idea of the conflict coming from the religious community itself, or, being able to grow or defend or give more shape to religious texts. I see it happening all the time throughout our Talmud, which is that evolution of interpretation. The thing that I'm stuck with is sort of that idea that, former concept of God of the gaps. I don't know if you know this, but
yes.
There's that tradition of saying that,
well.
religion answers those questions that science can't, right? That science doesn't even know what questions to ask, but that's where religion comes in. And I think that feeling that the more that we understand scientifically, the more advances that are made, that necessarily means that religion will then lose ground. And I don't think that there is a retreat for religion in that same way. I don't believe that conflict is there. I think that we're able to use both science and religion to further develop our intellect and discernment for deeper understanding. I think that in many ways, there are two sides of the same coin, and we're not going to throw that coin out, just reject it out of hand because there's two different sides to it. As we mentioned before, the science is there to really break things down to their parts and see how it works. And I think that religion is at its core really there to join or to build, to put things together, not to see how they work necessarily, but to see what they mean when they're integrated. As much as science will analyze, I think religion is there to integrate. And we know in many ways that the information that science can do to help develop religious traditions, I think is there really to help us aspire to what ought to be. So we take from science what is and a deeper understanding of what is, and we are inspired to grow in our understanding of what ought to be in time. I think that our understanding of the world as it is also gives us hope for a world that can be not only this world, but if you have faith in a future world, instead of looking back as science might do in that way, we're able to look forward and to create something not about necessarily looking at the origin of life, but really about the purpose of life and how we live it. We need to be able to have science help us understand disease if we're going to cure it. We need, to make that better world. We need to understand from the scientific perspective why people might do destructive acts if we're going to rise above it, or to understand the causes of poverty in real measurable ways in order to alleviate it. So I think religion may ask questions that science can't answer, but I think that we need both ways of thinking in order to have that fuller perspective. I just want to say one thing about the conflict I think the wall that religion might put up against science, can come from that, the idea that Albert Einstein said that, science without, or religion without science is lame, and science without religion is blind, or maybe the opposite way around. But the understanding that we need both of them. And I think the idea that we can give a framework for science itself, the conflict that came up with Judaism, that's measurable and sort of in our own lifetimes or existence, could be seen through, the pseudoscience that led to really destructive behaviors. The idea that, there was biology-based racism, or, it could justify colonialism or genocide for, in the eugenics that happened during the Holocaust. We have to remember that these were based on scientific theories, and to be able to use them as a way to justify involuntary sterilizations, or, the Tuskegee experiments, any of these things that were supposedly on unbiased research, we have to really kind of give pause and say, that's not exactly true. We know that there is science that happened in its time, and it can be proven false later. But I think religion has to be able to be there as well to ask that question. What does this mean? How are we going to use this for the good of humanity, and interpret it in a different way? I think it allows for a fuller picture, and just another question at the table, if nothing else.
Can I ask you something here?
Can I say something?
Okay, sure, yeah.
Thank you. So can you, Rabbi Mackler, can you just tell me again, what was that? I hadn't heard about the gaps thing. What was that exactly that you said it was?
So the God of the gaps was a theory that God answers, or the answers to that science can't come up with. That's where God fills in. Right?
Yeah.
God's filling in those
gaps. That's really interesting. And I just want to say that as a scientist, the more I learn about how things work, the more amazed I am that any of us are here, to be honest with you, and that we are walking around and for the most part functioning pretty well. And I have to say that that's true not only of human beings, but when I go outside and I walk around my neighborhood and I look at the plants and I go to the zoo, the Nashville Zoo, and there's those tiny little poison dart frogs. I'm like, how is that even possible that they have all their organs in there and that they're functioning? So to me, learning more about how things work actually makes me believe more in a God and a creator. And so I had not heard about that God of the gaps. So thank you for telling me about that. That's
I don't ascribe to it.
Oh, no, I know that. I got that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a helpful framework. That people I think have, is that if one's going to have more power, then one necessarily has to have less. And I think it's different. I think it's more about influence, and that can grow, for both sides, instead of having to, it's not a zero-sum game, for me.
So can I be the adjunct provocateur here, though? Because I think all of us agree, it seems to me, that they're not incompatible. And I think you're right, Rabbi, that I think it seems a little bit like an inside baseball, because there are people who are Jews and Muslims and Christians, ex-Muslims, who actually fundamentally say that science is the reigning paradigm. Religion has nothing to offer. So I think, and there may be some people who are joining this webinar for that reason, to hear, how do you surmount that kind of, because there are people from the sort of ex-Christian side, you got Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett, and a lot of new atheists. And I'm guessing that there are other religions where there are new atheists from their religious traditions. What would we say to people who are simply unwilling to acknowledge that religion has any discursive kind of contribution to make, intellectual contribution to make in terms of human flourishing? Because they can always give the examples that you've just given earlier, whether it is the Tuskegee experiment or genocide of various types, and all of these kind of horrific treatments that religious people have done, Christians, let's say, in the name of God. So now you can then apply it more broadly and say, okay, religion therefore is basically the corrosive animus against true flourishing of humankind. I mean, I think then a lot of them then will talk about science as the way to answer all that. And we can always offer examples of science that have done quite the opposite. But then how do we reconcile? Because I do think that is one thing for all of us to say, yeah, there are no real differences. If you understand, put on the better glasses, you can see that it is, yes, but a lot of us don't want to put on those glasses to see better. I mean, whether the lens of glasses happen to be Islam or Judaism or Christianity. So how do we say, I mean, how do we then come up with some kind of better instantiation of our rhetoric or better manifestation of our lifestyle that'll help, our religions to be more alluring to those who are scientifically orientated and will not budge at all to move toward religion. I mean, that's the kind of people that I run into a lot among those who were, formerly religious, but not anymore, and they would believe in science as the reigning paradigm that answers
maybe the beginning of the solution will be that for all of us to realize that we are not God, and no one of us has the right to speak in behalf of God.
Right.
I can say about Islam as a religion that Islam eliminates this power given to the clergy to speak in behalf of God. In Islam, anyone has the ability to tackle the text is welcome. I am the Imam of the Islamic Center, but I will always say, the Imam has no authority without being able to prove his opinion. I have to make a strong argument for a religious opinion. Otherwise, they have the right to dismiss my opinion. I think in the case of Islam, and all of you will speak about your tradition, in the case of Islam, eliminate the power of the clergy by depending solely in the text itself. So to start with, I cannot say to you today, God spoke with me last night because of this webinar and said, Osama, say this, and all of you has to listen to me. I'm not God. I'm giving you my best understanding. And this is why the perspective can be evolving all of the time. And the people can be comfortable coming with a new perspective, having new tools in their hand. When I heard that going to the zoo and can make your belief stronger, you literally mention a verse in the Quran while God said, can't they see around themselves? If you look around, you will see God everywhere. But I have to be honest, saying the religious community did not do a good job all of the time. Sometimes the religious community come across very aggressive, mean, not tolerating any questions. We don't want anyone will question anything. It means he or she is an atheist. This has happened in the religious life. And this is why some of the intellectual individuals intend to be discouraged. I feel like, at least in the case of Islam, the text itself is the proof, not any individual. No one has the authority to speak in behalf of God without being able to prove his or her opinion, and the perspective can be evolving all of the time. When we ask the scientific community to be mindful of the human limitation, we should ask the religious community to be nice little bit, to allow people discussion and to give room for debate. Without debate, we cannot have a strong belief.
Well, this has been a really stimulating discussion. I want to switch gears just a little bit before we move to the Q&A, the questions put into the Q&A. So Maureen, Dr. Gannon, do you think that there's a stigmatization against people of faith in science? And another way to phrase that might be, do you think that people of faith feel free to bring their full selves to their work and to embrace their religious identity within the scientific community?
So, I would hesitate to speak for all people. I can only speak for my own experiences as a Christian and a Catholic in that regard. I go to lots of scientific conferences and grant reviews, and we hang out with all of my science friends, for dinners and at the bar. And, I've been in situations where people didn't know that I was a Catholic, and the conversation turned to actually making fun of or belittling Catholics and Christians as being uneducated or being stupid or having ridiculous beliefs. And, I've been there on Ash Wednesday when I had bangs and nobody could see that I had ashes on my forehead. And people were making fun of it being Ash Wednesday. And, there have been times that I've been brave and spoken up. and told people in the moment that I was a Catholic. And then I then asked them, so now do you think I'm stupid and uneducated after you've known me for all these years? So sometimes I've been good and sometimes I've done that, but I have to admit, and I'm sad to say, I'm not always brave in those situations and those opportunities. And actually that's part of the reason that I agreed to speak on this panel today. I think that, you know, when I feel safe, when I know people, when I get to establish a relationship with them and a friendship with them, and I feel safe professionally, I think that's an opportunity when I can bring my authentic self as a person of faith to that situation. But I don't always feel safe. As I've moved forward in my profession, you know, I'm older. I've been promoted. I'm more comfortable in my career and my success. I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about my faith when asked. So I think the feeling of safety might change over the time of your career. Certainly I didn't have it very much earlier in my career. And I'm still nervous about doing this today, to be honest. And I hope that, you know, my colleagues who know me and have a good opinion of me as a scientist and an intellectual is still there. I can't control what other people think. I can only control how I respond to them and how I act. So I do think there's some stigmatization. I don't know if that's true of all faiths. I don't know that everyone of faith can feel that they can bring themselves fully to their scientific interactions. But, you know, my hope is that as academics and intellectuals, you know, we tend to pride ourselves in being open-minded and tolerant and working towards being more inclusive. It's a work in progress, but I think that's what we strive for. So I would like to see that faith is included as another dimension of diversity, and that as a community, we're all working to learn more about each other's faith and what we believe or don't believe, and that we have a goal of understanding and appreciating what each of us brings to the table and to the endeavor of scientific discovery.
And Imam Balul and Rabbi Mackler, we have more and more young people from your faiths also within our scientific community. Do you think that these young scientists in your faiths feel differently than Maureen just expressed in this regard?
I think it's a human issue, and it has a relationship with the age, as Maureen said, and the experience. I am proud of them all, and I hope that all of them can ask any question anytime. We cannot create a sound society without each member of the society feels comfortable to speak her or his mind. We will be creating a hypocrite society if we are not comfortable. I think we owe it to each other, and I hope we encourage everyone to ask questions all of the time. And it's the only way for us to grow. It's the only way for us to have a deeper perspective, a right one. I had a discussion, Rabbi Mackler was a Reform Jewish, and he questioned the existence of God. And we were having a discussion, a rabbi, very nice man. And I said to him, you should stop questioning the existence of God. Otherwise, both of us will lose our job. We need God for our job. And I really feel it's good for us to ask. My religion encouraged me to ask, encouraged me to understand, encourage our young people to ask. We always say in the Islamic Center, you can ask about anything without limitation. If I have the answer, I will give it. If I don't, I will research, and it's a good opportunity for me to learn. Or we can invite someone like you to answer the questions. It's good for everyone. I hope everyone feels comfortable to be him or herself all of the time.
And I would just add to that, you know, I think there's a little hesitancy in the Jewish community of bringing, your personal faith into a public sphere in different ways. I think there's just some different boundaries maybe that we have or past trauma that we have about any public expression of faith. But I think being able to bring yourself from that tradition of, looking at the world with deep appreciation and awe and being driven by curiosity and feeling comfortable in the challenge and the question and in the humility of knowing that we don't know everything. One of my favorite quotes from Maimonides is, teach your tongue to say, I do not know, and you shall progress, right? If you can only take that step back, and I think this is true for science and religion, to say, I don't know, then we have chance for growth. And I think that bringing yourself from your faith perspective that way, I think people feel very comfortable because in the Jewish tradition, because that is sort of how we are in the world and how we are with each other, constantly asking, where do we learn this from? How do we know this? But doing so from a place of curiosity and awe, I think is really that way that we can bring ourselves faithfully into those scientific realms.
I love that. I hope that the young people on the line listening now are feeling encouraged that they can bring their whole selves to work after hearing from all of you. So let's move into some of the questions that were submitted in advance by our registrants. So first of all, assuming religion and science are pursuing truth and each is describing reality, how do they tactically and creatively engage in a dialogue that keeps the best of each and develops mutually supportive outcomes? And Rabbi, I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier, so maybe it's something you would expand on a little. Oh, you're muted, Elsa.
I thought I was going to make it through this one session without ever having to hear that.
I know, we were so close.
Sorry. I think, the idea that they can be used, religion and science can be used as buttresses for one another to help us understand and grow our understanding and knowledge in very different ways. They are not answering or asking even the same questions. If we want to look at the creation story and try to peel it apart and see if it's scientifically true or provable, there are people that will sit with it and say you can look from simplicity to complexity, in each of those days. And the text even says, but a day is like 1,000 years in your sight, right? So we have ways of trying to make them integrate, but we can also say, science may ask how the world was created, and religion's going to ask us why. It's going to try to help us understand why it was created and how we interact with the world as it is. If we really look at each other, through the creation of humankind as seeing the divine in one another, I think we can use both as a way to understand, religion should be part of the scrutiny of scientific theories, I believe. And this is what I was mentioning before, is sort of that understanding when people use scientific theory as the basis for social policy. I know that we have to do better based on our history. And I think just to be able to question and challenge that, leaving the world of science and coming into the world of, the lived experience of people, we can do better and we can be formidable allies, with the dignity of humanity, our social wheel that provides and cares for the weak and vulnerable, right? Not using the Darwinian survival of the fittest, but really saying, religion has a different answer to that. And if that's going to be the case, then we have to make sure that we as a community of human beings takes care of the weak and vulnerable, that we have to take care of our planet and our natural world. I think that religionists and scientists can and should be those allies for one another.
I have to agree 100%. Again, and I think beautifully said, thank you. I do think that it's important to reiterate the compatible or reconcilable positions that we find ourselves in. I think there's a lot greater common good that we can do, starting with interfaith, right? Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, like having three major, and Hinduism and others, to really kind of come up with a very, very, this to me is a beautiful manifestation of it, to recognize that science and religion are not at loggerheads, at least among us. Although there are some people, obviously, who do think that, who do not want religion. So I do think that it's important, because one of the constant kind of criticisms I hear from my secular friends is that you can't even get along among yourselves, right? You hate, and I think it's really, really important for people outside of the religious communities, many of them find themselves utterly in the uber scientific communities, to see that religious communities are not only about producing strife, but actually about producing genuine concord, genuine peace, and the common kind of endeavor to really see that whether it is about COVID-19 or about environmental crises or all of these things, that science is also trying to help answer, but also religions can help answer that in a different way, but but in a complementary way rather than contradictory way. I just love the way you think about this as a flip side of the same coin. Because if the same coin is about human existence and human flourishing, which I think all religions seek to, aspire after that, then we have to say, okay, we have something to really offer. We have offered many things, sometimes wonderfully, sometimes woefully, but for the most part, overall good. Then we can actually say, hey, scientists, I know you care about human flourishing as well. Then let's think about how we can actually do it together rather than separately. Because I do think that, especially in our days, at least within Vanderbilt, there's a lot of greater, understandable and laudable emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think in my life experience, for 8 years, I lived on the Ingram Commons as a faculty head before Alyssa came along. And one of the beautiful things that I observed was to really see the greater influx of our Muslim students and the accommodation that the university made for them for their foot washing and so on and so forth, and make room for their hours of prayer. I think as a Christian that was one of the most beautiful things that I got to witness, and also help celebrate the Eid celebration when I was a faculty head. That's something that I really pushed hard to get going, to really have, because at least initially around the 2006 and 7, many of our Islamic Muslim students were actually from Malaysia, and they're almost all engineering students. And they felt they were, first of all, thousands of miles away from home, and coming to a region of America where they were afraid that it's going to be all Christian and a particular kind of Christian. So I think for some of the Christian faculty to really say, we want to make them feel really at home. And that really kind of helped them to really kind of see that America is not all about out to get Muslims or anti-Islamic. And I think so those things were really helpful. And that created a better basis of conversation among ourselves, but also along with the scientific community as well. And they're not just, kind of rigid boundaries. There are a lot more porous membrane between the two as well.
We have 3 minutes left, so I want to ask our last question that hopefully all of you can give a brief answer to, and that is, how can we stem implicit biases on both sides of the dialogue of science and religion? Who wants to jump in? Imam Abu?
Well, I hope we can all see the benefit. And I feel like the starting point is for all of us within this discussion or out of this discussion to realize that we have the need to start speaking with each other instead of speaking about each other. We have to allow room for discussion. I don't think I can improve in my religious life without you questioning my faith. And I see the benefit of us collectively helping each other, and I see that this dialogue is as an essential part of it. Let me at least say, we don't have even to agree. Having an agreement shouldn't be a goal. The discussion is what we hope for. We should enjoy agreement and the disagreement, and let us all remember that we are attacking the issue, not attacking each other. I mean, you can agree or disagree, and maybe because of, in my case, I tried hard to prepare for this, to come with a conflict between Islam and the scientific community. I couldn't come with something really I would be proud of myself saying, you know what, there's a conflict here, because Islam does encourage, and I appreciate this discussion.
Thank you. Maureen?
Yeah. So I think the important thing is, you don't understand something that you don't know or try to know. And so instead of, labeling people or thinking of them as whatever label you put on them, whether it's Christian or atheist or agnostic, get to know the person. Learn more about the people who are different than you, right? And I think that once you know someone or more than one someone from a group that's different from you, you'll realize you have a lot more in common than you have different. And if we were all the same, I really think that would be really boring. And in science, we talk about how, different perspectives of thought to bring to a problem are the only way we're going to solve problems. And I think that that's true of anything in life, societal issues, world issues, religious issues. So I think if we all agreed about everything, even what our favorite music was or our favorite color was, the world would be very boring. And so I think getting to know each other better and being more open-minded about somebody who maybe is from a group that you have maybe, negative thoughts about, learn more about those people. And I think that that's the only way that we're going to do this.
I would add an amen to all of that, but also to say, I think being driven by curiosity, and in religion, I ascribe to that holy envy, to appreciate others' traditions and points of view in order to not just learn about theirs, but to better learn about mine, and to really sort of give shape and form to my understanding of my own faith, as well as that, the collaboration and relationship building that I think we can do. And I think those of us who are not scientists can look with awe and appreciation to the scientists who work very hard in collaboration to do what they've done, especially recently, knowing that, DEI and having a diverse group around a table really give us the best chance for more eternal answers.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, those of you in the audience. Thank you very much. I hope the ideas expressed here were enlightening and thought-provoking for you, and we will follow up with a link to the recording in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with friends. And we hope you'll join us again for future Bench to Table events as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.